Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. We got a special treat for you today. The one and only Matthew Ehret. You can find him over at the Canadian Patriot.org, the Rising Tide Foundation.net. You can check him out on Substack /Matthew Ehret. He's written multiple books. I think the latest one is I could be getting this wrong, but The Symphony of Two Americas. Was that previously written, or is that one of the newer ones, or?
Kind of. It's a hybrid. It's the Clash of the Two Americas.
Okay.
That was the first volume, and it's the Unfinished Symphony. So that's volume 1 of 4. And then the most recent one is here. Actually, it was.
Yeah, let's check it out.
Yeah, it's right here. Actually, it's Clash of the Two Americas, Volume 4, The Anglo-American Roots of the Deep State, which was co-authored by my wife, as she's co-authored all of the books with me, with a little picture of the St. Mark's Lion of Venice there, representing the old Venetian Empire, and then the synthesis of the British flag and the American flag, obviously. So just to give people a sense of, like, what is this oligarchy? We talk about deep state. Well, what is that terminology? What does it actually mean? Because people are very confused about, well, what do you mean when you say the word? What do you mean when you say the word? Is it like shadowy corporations? Is it Davos? Is it intelligence? So, like, what is it? So is it China, and is it Russia? That ran Russiagate that are running the U.S. deep state to overthrow democracy? No. So, we tried to give people a broader historic context of, like, what the nature of oligarchism is, since no part of history could be understood without an appreciation for the existence of a continuity of an oligarchical agency that operates in a very similar way, although modifies its techniques over time, going back to ancient Babylon. So what is it? How does it work? How did it transmogrify from Rome to Venice to the British Empire, and what is its current manifestation today? Since it's not really just the United States took over and now is the US Empire and there's no more British Empire, it's not that at all. There's something which has been working since really JFK was murdered, and before that, to undo the Republic itself, or whatever was viable and good from the US American revolutionary experience. There's been effort to undermine it from the outside and from traitors within, building up fifth columns. And it has nothing to do, as far as, like, when people say, oh, is it Russia or is it China who are our enemies? No, these nations, these civilizations are targeted just as much as they've targeted the people in the nations of Europe and North America. It's not nation state based. It's something more than that. And so we tried to really just put some meat on the bones and demystify it a little bit.
Yeah, it seems like it's a pretty big labor to do, because it goes back so far. You've written, I've read a little bit of the books. I've failed to read one in its entirety, and I apologize for that. I should have done that before we spoke, because that makes me look like a knucklehead. That being said, I've seen tons of interviews, and it seems that the research you guys have done on this particular structure that seems to have its hooks into all the civilizations. It goes back to the Rhodes Scholars. It goes back to Khazaria. And how did you get, before we start getting into the story, what was it that piqued your interest, that wanted you to start digging in and finding out more about this?
I guess the thing that put me in a more active versus passive consumption mindset was 9/11. That was for me, like, it shook me. Before that, I had typical, left-leaning opinions about corporate, critiques and things like that, and war bad, but it still wasn't very sophisticated, and it was still a little bit, it was superficial. I ultimately was perfectly happy just living my life the way I was living it, knowing this trivia and having opinions that I had about corporations being bad. But who cares? But for me, the 9/11 was the big thing that really shattered my my comfort zone, and made it a lot more real. And then from there, I think this is a common theme from a lot of people I've encountered. That was a big wake-up call for tons of folks, in a similar fashion that the whole COVID weirdness of the last 3 years has been another big, shocking wake-up for a lot of other people more recently. You get these spurts of I don't like using the term waking up. And it was when I started, trying to figure out, well, this didn't arise out of a vacuum. Like, obviously, this is a complex process that was undertaken to make this false flag happen, that justified all of these dystopic policies, both that destroyed millions of lives in the Middle East, but also expanded a massive surveillance state inside of the United States, and so much more. So where did that come from? So, you know, you dig and you're starting to get now more into some drama of history. So that took me into an appreciation for history as shaped by international bankers working to subvert and enslave. But again, it lacked positive solution. Like I didn't have in music, you know, you have counterpoint. You got multiple voices. You got one voice. You got another voice musically playing off each other. I only had the dark voice, kind of like Blackbeard. So I was like, at a certain point, getting very depressed. But then the paradox is always like, well, but then why do they have to kill people like John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., Lincoln? Why do great people often have to get assassinated if they have this much power? So that was for me my counterpoint. I started really just deciding to focus on the good. Like, what is it in humanity that has resulted in these bursts of goodness, of progress, emancipation? Why are we not still enslaved? Why are we not still feudal serfs in a plantation like in the medieval period? So then that became more of an obsessive focus for me. Is like, well, what about those moments when it could have gotten a lot worse, but instead, humanity was able to resist and create positive results for our progeny. So then that was like the healthy thing that I needed, and I was given a big assist by beginning to discover the works of Lyndon LaRouche, the late American economist who I speak a lot about. I found his research and the networks of researchers that he built up since the 70s to be really, really useful at just helping to solidify those foundations of like, well, what were these better traditions of Western civilization that were not just rapacious, exploitative, colonizing and bad? What about the good ones? What about the good traditions that have been suppressed? So that was very empowering for me, gave me a lot more of a clearer sense, not only of the past, but also thus of the future. Like what are the pathways that could function to bring us out of the storm, which obviously was not something that should have surprised people, so that's sort of it. Those in short.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like discovering the writings of Lyndon LaRouche was what gave you the courage to go back into the cave.
I think so. That's a great way of putting it. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, and I like the idea. One of many things that I like listening to you and reading your articles is that you're really good at identifying these different patterns that seem to be repeating. And I love that you focus and shine a spotlight on the people that were breaking the chains of the slavery that was thrust upon people, whether it was JFK trying to build this transcontinental railroad from Alaska coming all the way down. And, it seems to me at one point in time, the United States was actually trying to do what maybe the unipolar world is trying to do right now, and is kind of trying to recreate like a real commerce or something like that. Can you maybe share with my audience what it was those guys were doing by trying to, unite Russia and China? And can you tell that story?
Yeah, sure. Well, this is a fascinating story, and for a Canadian, I'm in Canada. I run the Canadian Patriot magazine, and I set that up in 2012. And so it's especially important for us, but it's important for everybody living in North America. And the thing that I was trying to understand was, why are we the only monarchy of the Americas, right? Like, why is Canada still, even to this very day, based upon hereditary institutions with a privy council, lieutenant governors appointed by the crown, representing crown agencies within each province, with a governor general at the top, representing, who's the official head of state of Canada. People think it's like Justin Trudeau or Harper no, it's no. That's a prime minister, the top minister. That's all it is. The actual official head of state is still the sitting crown, whoever that might be, who Justin and every prime minister has to pledge allegiance to, as they also are inducted into the Privy Council, which is where they also have to take oaths of secrecy to keep things secret that a good servant ought to keep for Her Majesty or His Majesty. That's actually, that I'm not even paraphrasing. That's literally what they all say. And I'm like, well, what the hell is this? Because at the time, 2012, I was still a full-time volunteer with the LaRouche organization, which had at the time a small office in Montreal. And we were organizing for a variety of policies with the population. Part of what I was doing involved going out with political tables and signage and literature and trying to talk to strangers about big ideas. And it was a good exercise, really good exercise, but a little bit alienating too, because you're representing an American agency within Canada, talking about doing these American actions. Like, we got to get Congress to pass, Glass-Steagall, break up the banks, and sounds all great. And, Canadians who are better people would agree with that. But then it's like, but what do I do? Like, what do you want me to do? I'm in Ontario or in Quebec. Like, what do you want me to call up a U.S. congressman? Is that what you're asking? I was like, I don't know what I'm asking you, I guess. So, like, there was a disconnect. And so I was a younger person. A few other people felt the same way, obviously, who were, a bit younger. And we're like, we got to figure out Canada. And nobody really did the work. So we started with a few of these anomalies, why we didn't join the American Revolution back when Ben Franklin was up in Canada in 1776. He was up here in April for like 5 weeks, trying to organize to get Quebec to become the 14th colony, saying together, we will declare independence. Why didn't we accept that? What were the operations that subverted his allies who felt strongly about joining the U.S. cause against Britain? So what's that story about? Can we find out? What about the story of, like, well, what about Lincoln's allies at a time when Lincoln was doing so much to keep the Union intact in opposition to a British instigated civil war? And you could prove that. I mean, that was sufficiently proven in my mind that the British were very much behind the dissolution of the U.S. Back in the 1860s, utilizing, of course, their fifth colonists in the U.S., what have you. But despite that, Lincoln he maintained it. He had some help from the Russians. He had also some help from allies in Canada. People like Isaac Buchanan was a leading figure in Canada at the time, who was a major political powerhouse and who organized to ensure neutrality. He made the point that if Britain declares war, which they were about to do in 1863, he's like, Canada must stay neutral. We're not going to join in and fight Lincoln. So you had all of these things, and I'm like, I was thinking, well, why didn't his network continue to stay in power after Lincoln died? How were they purged? And why did the British traitors and agents become the dominant figures who then shaped what became our Constitution, our Acts of Confederation, which enshrined a deep state with a Privy Council at the center command of the entire new nation of Canada? And so all of these questions, Yeah. So this gets at your question regarding the transcontinental railway, the link between the United States through British Columbia, Alaska, into Russia, and down into China, into Asia, into the Middle East, into Africa, which was a very serious policy that a lot of leading statesmen in the late part of the 1800s were thinking about and moving towards. Why didn't that happen? So this formed the basis of volume 2 of the Untold History of Canada book series. So before I got to this book series on the Clash of the Two Americas, I did a 4-volume book series on the Untold History of Canada. And so volume 2 showed that story, and it involved discovering that Lincoln's transcontinental railway was never intended to just be like connect the Pacific with the Atlantic by rail, which was an amazing milestone in human civilization. It never was done before. And what it did, people underestimate this, but it gave for the first time a sovereign nation the ability to break free of the British controlled monopoly over maritime trading. And that's how Britain maintained itself as this tiny little island that controlled 24% of the world landmass. The sun never sets. They controlled India. So much of the China economy was like dominated by the British. Big chunks of Africa, everything. So how do they do that? Well, again, you control maritime choke points. You don't have to control everything. You just know where, like the Straits of Gibraltar. You look at the Horn of Africa, the Straits of Malacca. There's only like 8 or 9 different choke points that you have to have strategic control over, and you can maintain dependencies everywhere and manage wars and everything else. So now with the rail, as you develop inland, you're free. You could start developing your local industry. You could develop local communication lines and trade within your own country. Powerful. And it was never supposed to end there. So Lincoln began it in 1863. He finished it in 1869. Well, it was finished in 1869. And there's a bunch of anomalies that all happen around the same time. anomaly number one, like 1867 was the year that the Alaska Purchase was made by Lincoln's leading surviving allies, like William Seward, the Secretary of State, who brokered this behind the scenes, completely off the record. It was a big surprise deal where Russia sold for $7 million Alaska, former Russian possession, right after Russia had saved the United States from dissolution. So the Russians and the Americans at the time had much more in harmony with each other. They understood each other very well, and they both understood the nature of this oligarchy centered in London. Now, number two is that was around the exact same moment, about a month. The Alaska Purchase happened 1 month before the British North America Act that created the Confederation of Canada was consolidated and signed off into law in London, which, what involved basically 4 provinces. Most of Canada was Hudson Bay private land. Like 80% of Canada that we know of today, most of that was just private Hudson Bay. It was called Rupert's Land. So it was a weird map when you look at Canada back in that time. So you have a little bit on the East Coast that became then confederated under some form of unified policy under Crown. But then you had this separation with British Columbia as a separate colony right above California, Oregon, and that was another separate colony. No trade, no commerce with the East, no other connection with the rest of the British Empire. Most of their commerce and trade and identity was located in their neighbors in Oregon and California. So most people at the time wanted in British Columbia, especially at a time of economic despair, which is what it was, the gold rush bubble. There's a big economic boom and a bubble that popped in the gold rush of the 1850s. So there was complete debt-riddenness, poverty, and people just wanted to get life back on track. Trade with California was all they had. And so there was a big movement to join the United States. And the idea was that Lincoln's Railway was going to then continue up, bring even more trade commerce through British Columbia that would then intersect into Alaska, which was designed to be a new northern metropolitan zone with a lot of mining development interests, but also with an idea of Arctic development, and telegraph lines were being set up to go across the Bering Strait with rail that would then connect into Russia. And at the same time, the ball was being put into motion with the Lincoln admirers like Sergei Witte and many other Russians in Russia who was the finance and transport minister of Russia, close ally of the better Americans, who were getting assistance from the Philadelphia Baldwin locomotives, which produced all of the rail cars that were then running on the Trans-Siberian Railway, which then is a 9,000 kilometer railway in Russia that was built up under the American model with American engineers, American economists, American industries supplying in friendship this development strategy for Russia, which themselves, they had only in 1860, right? They had also abolished slavery under the abolition of the serfdom. 25 million serfs went free under Tsar Alexander II, another assassinated great leader who was allied with Lincoln, and both of them were called the Great Emancipators, one of Russia, one of America. So a lot of points of synergy, and so all of the momentum was to do this, to build the Bering Strait rail tunnel. You see maps by people like William Gilpin that I've cited a lot, the first governor of Colorado Territory that largely saved the Union during the Civil War. He was the governor at a time when the South was going to open up what's called the Western Front, and Colorado was a strategic battle zone there, and Lincoln couldn't handle it. He had to deal with terrorist activities being launched from Montreal and from Toronto, where the Confederacy was granted massive basing operations by the British, who wanted to assist them any way possible to run terrorist activity against Lincoln from the north. That was the Confederate Secret Service was heavily active in Montreal, where I live. And so Lincoln had a 2-front war, and all of a sudden now they were going to open up a 3rd front. So Gilpin had to be he found himself. Luckily, he was a competent guy. And he was Lincoln's former bodyguard. Lincoln trusted him so much. He saved Lincoln's life when Lincoln was on his way from Illinois to California. From Illinois to Washington. And there were a couple of assassination attempts, which Gilpin and an elite 11-man bodyguard had subverted. So Lincoln really trusted this guy. He had him camped out in the White House for 100 days in those precarious first moments after the inauguration. And he's like, okay, you're going to be governor of Colorado. And so what he does, Gilpin, right when the southern slave power is opening up that western front, they need to win Colorado. He basically, with no revenue, no funds, he basically uses a state version of Lincoln's greenbacks, because he knew that Lincoln was going to do the greenbacks, the U.S. Treasury bonds that would be then monetized in the form of, a local national controlled mint instead of private banks giving you loans or controlling your currency emissions. So he did that. He paid his militias. He bought the supplies, everything, and did some serious battles, like the Battle of Glorieta Pass, to subdue and destroy the southern powers, which he beat them back successfully. So he saved the Union there. He did so much, and then he became the champion of the world, this Bering Strait land bridge that would have been, and he called in his book on the Cosmopolitan Railway for national banking, protective tariffs, creating these customs unions, the way, this is the way it was going. And so again, like, why did that get subverted? So that book, volume 2 of the Untold History of Canada, tells that story, how British Columbia was how one of its key leaders was killed in order to, the governor, actually an irony, it was a British governor named Frederick Seymour, who was a friend of America, but he was a British governor of British Columbia, but he was protecting the annexation movement and giving them as much space as they needed to join the Union. And at a certain point, when it was realized what exactly it was that he was doing, he was sent off to the north to try to resolve some like native Indian dispute, and he was probably poisoned. He came back dead anyway. And then his enemies were brought in, and immediately British Columbia, they had their debts forgiven by the British Empire. They were bribed. They were promised a railway from the east to the west so that we would finally give you trade. It took them like 15 years to do it, but they promised it. And Britain had to then buy up for pennies on the dollar the Hudson Bay land. So that big private region of Rupert's Land I was telling you about was immediately at that same time bought up by the British Empire, given to Canada. And now that's why today's Canadian map is what it is. And it was then made more possible to build the type of rail connections that we ended up building in the 1870s later on. But it created sort of a wedge between the danger of a U.S.-Russia friendship. Right. And that's been Canada's role primarily for most of the next 140 years, has been a wedge to disrupt the possible danger of Eurasian American collaboration, especially with the Arctic. So that's part of our sick history, and better Canadians in the 20th century fought against this. Better Americans like Franklin Roosevelt, Henry Wallace, during World War II, were trying to work with their allies in Canada, and they had a lot of allies in World War II in Canada who were very good people, later on purged, who were all trying to revive this Arctic development, Bering Strait rail tunnel program, which that's more volume 2 of the Clash of the Two Americas. That story is told at length. But yeah, and this is what JFK was sort of reviving. I don't think he had necessarily the plan for the Arctic Bering Strait rail tunnel, but he certainly had a program for continental development and friendship with Russia. That's for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really well said. And I think that sheds a lot of light on understanding the American-Russian divide, because I think we're so similar. And I know some Russian people, they're like the most hardworking, some of the most intelligent people I've ever met in my life. And I think that there's so much in common between the people of Russia, the people of Canada, and the people of America, probably the people in the world. But we're just forced upon us this wedge of division. And maybe it comes down to resources, maybe it comes down to banking. And this idea of banking, I got a question that I've been thinking about when we're speaking of resources, choke points, and relationships. It seems to me what's happening in the Ukraine, at least on some level that I've read in the papers, is that all of a sudden you're starting to see these contracts come out with Vanguard and BlackRock. They have got all these connections to rebuild Ukraine. And it just seems that it just seems to me that if, we're talking about Russia building these tanks and moving forward, it seems to me maybe some of this terrorism that we see in our country, whether these trains being derailed as terrorism or these food processing plants going down as terrorism, it seems to me maybe this is some sort of arm twisting to try to get America to send jets over to Ukraine. Because I think if Russia continues to take back the territory, then all of a sudden all those contracts by Vanguard and BlackRock are null and void, right? If Russia takes back that territory, the contracts to rebuild that area will no longer go to the banking. And that seems to me to be a pattern that happens in all world wars. It's like these bankers, they have all these reconstruction plans. They got money on both sides. And so they're funding both sides. I know that was kind of a shotgun out the back door with just a lot of stuff, but is there a connection there with the financial system kind of collapsing, the banks, the Ukraine, and this sort of weird eco-terrorism that's happening? Is that all connected, do you think?
Yeah, probably. I mean, there's never really, when you're thinking about these types of geopolitical dynamics, it's always important to not approach it mechanistically. And by that, what I mean is, the idea that, well, the naive but yet popularized mechanistic approach to thinking about causation is like why did this book fall? Right? Why did that book fall? Well, the mechanist would say, well, it's because you opened your hand and then it fell. It's like, well, why did I open my hand? Well, the mechanist would say, well, it's because you flexed you unflexed your muscles at a certain dimension, a certain tension that could be charted on this chart. Why did that happen? Well, it's because there were these electric currents that went through your brain that induced a certain like synaptic activity in the brain that resulted in the nerves transferring information to the muscles and it would go on forever. It would be an infinite like purgatory of just always another thing. So it's very linear. And it is material, hyper materialistic in the sense, and it could thus never understand real causation, because real causation was like something much more simple. It was like, I'm trying to make a point to you, and that idea, that intention that I have, which no computer can ever chart my idea, my intention. It's metaphysical, it's transcendental, but it's still shaping and causing my body and my motion, and my words and my sounds, and it's causing you to receive it over this weird medium of light EM emissions from our cameras and our microphones. Fun stuff. I mean, it blows the mind when you really just think in a childlike way about this stuff. It's cool. But all that to say, like, it's so simple. It was just like an intention, an idea caused that to happen. That's simple non-mechanistic answer. So when a lot of people who act like they have a lot to say about geopolitics, often when you watch them, and it's useful to look at the mechanics of what's going on in Ukraine, or regarding the bizarre, hazardous waste spills caused by train derailments and fertilizer companies blowing up and all this other weird stuff going on. Like, it's definitely useful to know mechanics. Don't get me wrong. Or like 9/11 buildings going down and the third building went down, no plane. Like, so like, it's good. Like, don't, I'm not saying be lazy. Like, look at the mechanics, but they often stop short. And then what happens is they miss the causal agency. And oligarchs and intentions generally never just do any one thing for one effect. There's always usually multiple layers to the effects of any type of serious intervention. So, and that's dynamics. So that's the fact of like the real dynamics shaping all of the human experience, and it always will be like that. So but it takes a little bit of retraining. I had to like sort of retrain my mind over time to just sort of think in a dynamic way. Like, don't try to look for every single like literal smoking gun, because you're never going to have a full whole answer of anything that couldn't be known better. But you could still know things. So don't just because you can't know everything perfectly doesn't mean you should throw away the idea that you could know anything, which is what a lot of people mistake when they become absolute relativists, saying, I have become so wise that I know that nothing exists, or that there is no good or evil, and that's why I'm now a wise person. And that's also a bit of a reactionary mistake to make. So all I'm saying here regarding the trains, the eco-terrorist activity, which is definitely the case, and BlackRock, the manipulations in Ukraine, and the danger of like Russia actually coming out on top, arranging the terms of peace on their terms and not on those of the Brussels-Washington clique. So the way I'm thinking about it partially is, okay, well, Do we know for a fact 100% of the details of the sabotage of the food processing plants and fertilizer plants and these four train disasters? No, I don't. We don't know the names. We don't know exactly the details of like what type of anarcho-eco terror group was launched. We don't know that, and we have to admit what we don't know. But does it smell like it? Yeah. Does it fit an MO, a modus operandi? Do I know of such eco-anarchists that are eco-terrorists that are tied to things like Extinction Rebellion or the there's a Canadian group called Deep Green Resistance. That's actually California, Canada-based West Coast. Yeah, they talk about it on their. You can go to their website, you can go to their literature, read their stuff. They've got a whole moral, legal, ideological justification that they have crafted for the above grounders who will declare war on industrial civilization from the establishment and will infiltrate. And they've been doing this for many decades. Banking, business, government, and will try to do it in an above ground way. And then the below grounders will be those who actually declare hard kinetic war on the basis of industrial civilization, attacking dams and energy systems, water systems, food. They've said it. They talk about it. I've seen no evidence that they don't do those things they say they want to do and talk about and have organized membership around the world for. I've seen, so there's that. Do they know what they're doing? Like, do they know how they're being used? No, I think they're useful idiots. They've been processed in a radicalizing educational system that is designed to create self-hating humans who think that we're a virus. And what do you do when you have a virus destroying a host? Well, if you really care about the host, aka in this case, Gaia, Earth Mother, Goddess, that's being killed by everything humans do, well, then you want to destroy the virus, right? So it's not that difficult of a set of logical steps to become a Unabomber. Like this is what Ted Kaczynski was doing when he was sending out his letter bombs for decades. It's not like he was just some sociopath with no morality sending these bombs. He had a whole thing in his head. Probably helped to it helped to put this stuff in his head when he was part of an MK Ultra operation as a talented student at Harvard, of course, in the 50s. But despite that, whatever the hell they did to him, he came out of it with a complex of being a self-hating misanthrope who believed that human beings and technology could only destroy our own freedom by allowing technology to grow. So he had this formula, which looks like this, right? Like technology increases, freedoms decrease. Right? That's the formula that he was radicalized around. And so if you love freedom, you have to stop technology. And so he sent his bombs to who? Well, people who he identified as being responsible for the growth of new technology. People who were like, leaders of various industries or research and development groups, things like that. And, he injured something like 40 people, killed a bunch, finally turned himself in, had a whole thesis published in the Washington, I think it was the Washington Post, I want to say, with his whole manifesto on why industrial civilization must be destroyed. This became an organizing tool in the 90s, this manifesto, to shape and give direction to a new generation, a new breed of these eco activists who would be more than just simply saving nature. They would be people who shared his heart and mind on targeting the means by which human population grows as a virus, meaning food production, anything that causes abundance, that all had to be destroyed. And some of the founders of the Deep Green Resistance movement I had referenced, one of them, the very least I know, was a direct correspondent with Kaczynski, the Unabomber, while this guy was in prison. So you got that stuff. Then you got the whole BlackRock. What is Larry Fink? What is BlackRock? What is Vanguard? Are they just private enterprises in it for making capital gains for profit? No, not at all. Not at all. They're one of many geopolitical instruments created not for making money, but for managing a system. And so how is it that Larry Fink is in the position that he's in? Does he care just about money? No, Larry Fink is a World Economic Forum young leader. He's part of the whole deep green ideologue crowd that has signed on to all of these central banker climate compacts. He believes in this transhumanist sort of post-industrial organizing of society. So, of course, like just like George Soros, he has a psych profile not too contaminated with pesky things like conscience, so he's youthful. He was granted certain authorities to be in charge of certain things, like in this case BlackRock, in order to gobble up for his masters, his handlers, as much real estate, everything else that he could possibly do. Bill Gates was assigned a similar role as himself, being just another synthetic cardboard cutout, as was Jeff Bezos, as was Elon Musk. These people just, it's not like they have any deep character. They're selected early on to be front men, because you can't just do things. If you're an oligarch representing one of these like old family bloodlines, you can't just go and do things in your own name. You need degrees of separation. You need courtiers, right? To carry mercenaries to carry out your desire as your instrument, your auxiliaries. So that's what these guys are. That's all they are. And in some cases, they create little dramas to, distract the plebes, between like Bezos versus Musk, or, it's just soap opera stuff, though. Like, they're all part of the same operation from the top. And yeah, they ultimately want to dominate the physical economy, the means of production. That's the key thing, because while they got everybody distracted for the past 50 years on worshiping markets and market fluctuations and speculative instruments and all this crap, they always knew that the thing that has the real value is the thing that we all live in: the infrastructure, the water management, the food production. Like, that's what they've been working at, trying to corral and take control of, so that they could then decide who gets what, who gets to live, who doesn't, with diminishing returns that they create that scarcity, right? And they can decide the triage themselves on their terms. So Ukraine, they've already killed off 300,000 young Ukrainian men under the last 1 year of a proxy war against Russia. That's already been sacrificed. They're willing to kill all of the Ukrainian people. And I think, frankly, they kind of wouldn't mind if all the actual indigenous Ukrainian people just died, so they could just control that zone for the type of, there's a lot of, some of the biggest food production areas in the world are in East Ukraine, or West Ukraine too. But Ukraine has huge food production, minerals, resources, there's a lot of stuff in Ukraine they would like to just control as a slave colony. They definitely want to have Russia as a slave colony. That's what Hitler was assigned to do, was like destroy Russia, turn Russia into a slave colony, with the dirty Untermenschen Slavs, which they see as like subhuman. Right, just like Africans. They wanted to, like, what did Hitler want if he was successful? Well, he and his Anglo-American counterparts, who were all equally happy to, manage a one world government, wanted Africa as well to be a big slave colony. They wanted China to be a slave colony with their, they were happy to allow the Japanese, who they also don't like. They think the Japanese are genetically inferior, but they're more than happy to work with those Japanese fascists who have an unbalanced samurai romanticism ethos, as local Asian enforcers. They were happy to have that carved up in local jurisdictions, right? But so Hitler wasn't going to just like go away if he won the war. He was going to manage part of a global world government under a banker's dictatorship with slave colonies at different parts of the world. Most of South America was going to be a slave colony. So that's sort of what they want to redo today, because it didn't work back in the 1940s. It was aborted. This thing didn't work the way their beautiful New World Order designs that they put so much effort and care into harvesting, when the seed sprouted, it was like this it was like their ivory tower models did not account for what was coming out of that seed. Which is like, you remember that movie, Little Shop of Horrors?
Yeah, I do. Seymour, feed me.
Yeah. Like, they did not expect this plant to like start like snapping. Yeah. It's like, oh, blood. But so they had to abort it. Now they're trying it again, but the same sorts of problems are happening. The reality is not acting in accord with their script of what this clean, New World Order was supposed to be, this clean fascism, not working out that way. So there's definite connections, because ultimately the common theme is, in both the case of the original New World Order attempt under Hitler, it was to impose a transhuman, aka at the time it was called eugenics, as the governing science of the master class that would then depopulate the world, keeping only those slaves alive who would be working in the mines to service the Übermenschen, the above humans, or more than humans, and that's sort of what the green movement, unfortunately, when you start looking at the origins of the modern green movement, from the 60s onward especially, it was all of the same unrepentant Nazi supporters like Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who was a co-founder of the World Wildlife Fund, along with Julian Huxley, the president of the Eugenic Society of Britain, who were co-founders of the World Wildlife Fund of Nature in the 1960s, but Julian Huxley was the actual grandfather of modern environmentalism when he created the International the International Union for the Conservation of Nature in 1947, as part of what he even says is going to be something that has to redirect the human values from being protecting humans against empire, which is formerly what the dominant value structure was, is like protect humans from empire, protect humans from war and starvation. Those are good values. And he says, no, we have to redirect the value system towards protect nature from humans. And so the way that the mechanism was going to be to revive this like ancient pagan Gaia worship cult that animated so much of the worst ugliness of the Roman Empire, and give it some scientific proto-scientific veneer, or pseudo-scientific veneer, I should say, around computer modeling that could justify that some human economic activity of some sort, they haven't decided yet in the 50s what it was going to be, was going to be attributed to some form of destruction in nature. And they ultimately ended up going with CO2 as the big demon, that they could just mathematically fit together, saying, look, when there's temperature increases or decreases, we often find in historical records associated changes in CO2. And they, of course, had to fudge the data so that people missed the fact that it wasn't the CO2. There was no evidence that the CO2 was causing the temperature, because when you actually started zeroing in and looking at the actual data sets in deep historical records, it was always that the temperature would first change hot or cold, and then as a consequence, you would find an associated rise or drop of CO2. So it was an innocent victim found guilty for a crime it didn't commit, CO2, or molecule, which is like plant food. Plants love it. Humans breathe it. They made this thing become the thing we're all afraid of. And it's also conveniently for them something that comes out when you burn like petrochemicals or you have industrial civilization. You produce these things. So the ultimate idea was they knew that, well, we would not democratically undo industrial civilization ourselves. That would like hurt or destroy our kids. So you couldn't do it that way. You had to do it in a more sneaky way. So take a contingent, like something that industrial civilization can't exist without, CO2, and make that the enemy. And people won't realize that they're then destroying their industries and their means of supporting themselves while they're busy looking at this evil molecule. And that was sort of what was decided upon. That was what they ran with. And it's been now 40, 50 years of this crap. And it's ultimately to bring about the same sort of self-hate. A society that hates itself can't love freedom, can't fight against tyranny. So that's one advantage of having, eco, or basically people walking around with shame and guilt for being human viruses. You create, on the other hand, those people, those useful wannabe above grounders like a Yuval Harari or others who are like, yeah, finally I can do something about this. I can be part of the establishment. And I'm being invited into these, so I can be part of the solution in an official way. And then also I just mentioned, you got the Extinction Rebellion fools and useful idiots who then are just you just let them go, and they're gonna organize in destructive ways on their own. And meanwhile, people aren't paying attention to the fact that, yeah, those like Bill Gates, who are virtue signaling, green eco warriors, or Jeff Bezos, same thing, or Branson, they're all also creating new mining organizations that are trying to dominate all of the minerals and rare earth resources of Africa and Congo and Zambia. I think it's called Kaibold Mining, founded by Bill Gates, this is at the heart of what's using tens of thousands of child laborers in super precarious situations in Congo, mining cobalt. They're using child labor. They're forcing massive environmental regulation, or they're destroying what little environmental regulation protecting water systems, forests, and other things. All of that is being destroyed because they demand it be destroyed in order to make Africa more business friendly, which is essentially a giant poverty-stricken slave colony by design under these eco sort of green virtue warriors. I mean, it's the level of hypocrisy is huge because they don't believe what they're saying. They know ultimately that the world is not warming because of anything humans are doing. If anything, we're going into an ice age. That's why Jeff Bezos has his $100 million villa in the areas of these little islands in Barbados that he's bought, which are supposedly going to be underwater according to the models that he's funding. So why are you buying these villas in that area? Like, do you just not care about your villa? No, you know that you're lying to people, and you're happy to use Africa like the Nazis wanted, like a giant slave colony, and you want to do the same thing to Russia and to China again. So.
Yeah, it seems. I think I overheard you say this one time. Mali is the model, and it's interesting to me. But more than interesting to me, I think it's interesting for a different reason. Like, to what end? Like, to what end are people doing? Is it just a lust for power? If you can look back at history, and something you've done is you've researched it so far back, there is this pattern of people just going out of their way to stop industrialization, to take advantage of people. And to what end? Like, if you base something on a lie, like carbon, in global warming is a lie to everybody. Everybody knows it, I think. A lot of people know it. So how could you have any sort of long-term model that's based on falsities? I don't understand to what end. Maybe this is why it always fails, is because it's based on a foundation of lies. Like, it can't stand, right?
Dude, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. I mean, but part of the oligarchy, or what impels an oligarchy to be an oligarchy and to act this unnatural way that it does, is defiance. Partially a defiance of what they otherwise know reasonably. If it was just reason governing them, this wouldn't be an issue, but it's not. But so reasonably, they could know that they're trying to manage a system of human beings, which is a creature that is a creature of dignity, of ideas, of self-identity, self-worth, creativity, and that in fact requires and has the capacity, and is proven to be the case for centuries and millennia, to leap beyond the limits to growth by encountering a problem in the present, or even foreseeing problems in the future and acting preventatively on those by coming up with a creative nonlinear solution concept to a problem, again, present or future, which results in giving us willfully greater powers of action supporting life at a higher quality of life with greater longevity, lesser infant mortality. This happens every time we do this in the right way. So they know on a logical level that having more people is not the sign that you've done something bad or that you're a virus, but that you've done something right when you needed to. That is understood. But despite that evidence that they have more access to than most of us, because ultimately we're given history books in a way of thinking that scrubs out, that hides a lot of this evidence, or distorts it in such a way that we don't understand it. But I mean, if you're dealing with an oligarchical grand strategist, no, you certainly have enough evidence at your disposal to know that this is exactly what human beings are. But they're compelled by something even more powerful inside of the cultural systems that the oligarchy is themselves governed by. Because you got to keep in mind, the oligarchy is themselves. What are they? Are they like all sovereign self-identities? Is every Henry Kissinger, who's even himself just a upper level manager, he's not a decider of much. But if you're actually in a closer degree of association with a deciding causal nexus within oligarchical systems, are you yourself a sovereign person, right? Who wakes up with a clean conscience, living your life in the way that's you're making your own decisions willfully on behalf of desires you actually have? Not really, because if you look at like the way they have to groom their own children, the type of experience that is created over many generations to make sure, or to enhance the potential that the children of the upper echelon elite are going to develop certain very unnatural sets of identities and passions that have to be associated with shape your identities, right? There's certain like distorted passions that you have to take pleasure in, which are all unnatural. You have to do certain things to those kids, which your heart kind of breaks thinking about like what Prince Philip Mountbatten could have been, when he was 2-3 years old, if he was just given authentic love and a good education and family upbringing. If he could have been something great, but he wasn't. He was born into an oligarchical family that didn't give a shit about his soul and wanted to turn him into like a clone of them, of his own caste. So you could say that in many ways. And Edgar Allan Poe is one of the greatest guys to diagnose the psychological mindset and heart of an oligarch. He does it really well in his Fall of the House of Usher. Anybody who wants to understand the psychology of oligarchs really, really effectively, and ultimately their own defiance of natural law and their own ultimate self-destruction, read The Fall of the House of Usher, short story. It's really good. Read The Mask of the Red Death. He takes it another angle. It's another really good Edgar Allan Poe diagnostic. And a lot of his little mini short stories regarding like the imp of the perverse, or even the Black Cat. What he's doing is he's taking you to a psychological deep dive into the nature of identities who are unaware of themselves and are capable of self-deluding and are otherwise known as other-directed. They're not inner-directed, they're other-directed. So it is your family structure, it is the oligarchical class structure itself, which has created a momentum that demands you take on certain attributes in order to live up to the expectations that are being put on you as you're born into this thing and are expected to manage it for the next generation and beyond according to certain ideals and passions. So, I mean, it's a convoluted way of me saying the answer to the question that you threw up, but it's important because it's got many dynamics. But what do they ultimately want? They want a delusion. They want to actualize a utopia, which literally means no place. But they have a vision of a world that cannot be, that they're committed to, and a system that they're wishing to control that isn't the way they wish it to be, that they demand it to be, despite the fact that they know it cannot be. So there's a certain built-in irrationalism here, if you hear what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Because they demand that we be these automaton robots with a little bit of a mixture of animalistic, hedonistic, bestiality. So robots with bestial impulses for pleasure and avoidance of pain. That's all they want us to be, because it's only by us being that way that that their plans for the world could work. The fact is, we're not the way that they want us to be. And so as much as they try to create cultural environments, like, look at the types of music, the types of film, the types of extracurricular activities they want to encourage and normalize into their victim populations. Yeah, they're going to enhance different attributes of human escapism, human bestialization, human addiction to sensualness, or maybe just robotic activity too, right? Mixed in with like, this robotic logic. You'll get people like bouncing back and forth, in the Apollo Dionysus cult of like, I got to be an Apollonian, dutiful person who hates my job and works 9 to 5 during the day, and does all these like right-looking things. But then I've got my inner beast I have to satisfy when I go to the rave, right? I just like party and I go into these vacillations, So nobody's at one with themselves, and if you can't govern yourself, then you can't be a citizen who can self-govern as part of a nation, who can make decisions in democracy. You can't do that. You will need a zookeeper. If you allow the beasts within you to run wild, and you're not at ease with yourself, well, you will need somebody who is a zookeeper to manage you. And ultimately, that's what they want, is for people to come to the conclusion on their own that they're not capable of self-governing, because every time you give them freedom, they create a mess. Look at globalization, right? We all had freedom to be a consumer society. We could all consume what we wanted for 40, 50 years. We had total freedom, we were told. And look at the mess we caused. So now, isn't it the case that we need a new type of Great Reset system where we don't expect the type of freedoms to own things or to eat meat when we want to, or have eggs or things like that? Shouldn't we pay our penitence now for the eco sins that we committed to nature and ourselves and our future. So this is where you get like the type of religious, like glazed over eyes of like a Greta, you know, who's like, how dare you? And she means it, right? It's like, it's very authentic. That level of like anger and hate, because we didn't, it's true. It's true in a sense. Like we allowed for a dynamic that was unnatural to corrupt us, to normalize corruption and mediocrity for decades, which resulted in a selfishness that resulted in us becoming more and more addicted to sweatshop, cheap labor, child labor in Africa, other things to feed our dollar stores. That happened. We didn't maintain our infrastructure. That's all now in atrophy and decaying. That's like, we literally sacrificed the unborn generations who are now like kids, right? They have every right to feel angry. And so, but the trick was they got us to do it ourselves, and they got us to they projected elements of the oligarchical way, the Tao of the oligarchy, right, onto us. So the useless eaters that we're told we have to manage as part of the, you know, the post Great Reset world, using drugs and video games, like Yuval Harari says, it's actually that useless class is not us, really. I mean, we allowed ourselves to become a useless service society consumer class, but that wasn't our nature. It's the oligarchy who is the useless class, who doesn't learn real world skills. They don't do anything or contribute anything useful in society, but they project that and got us to take on those attributes of oligarchism, which could then only be resolved out of like the chaos that would naturally occur, could only be resolved by order from a Leviathan, from some zookeepers from above who would come in the way H.G. Wells talks about in his the
Time Machine with the Morlocks and the Eloi.
I wasn't thinking of that one. I was actually thinking about the not the World Set Free. He did another one. Oh, I forgot. They made it into a movie.
War of the World. Was he War of the Worlds?
Oh, he was that too, but he did this. I'm forgetting. There was this movie with the sky people. Like it was made into a movie in 1934 or 37. What
was the premise of it?
The premise of it was it's a world war is about to slam into humanity. We never get to know why, but we basically destroy ourselves. Then we've got about 60 years of plague, and destruction. We go into a dark age. But there is the scientific Freemasons, the Freemasonic scientists, the sky people who were able to create sort of a breakaway civilization on an island where they were able to save and preserve the best of science, and they preserved the ability to fly with planes, and everyone else had lost the ability to fly and they forgot how that works. And towards the end, you know, like the sky people who are just these like oligarchical human, like they're obviously misanthropic. They don't care about humans, but they come in and they save everybody by bringing in the planes that destroy the sovereign nation state. And you have like this guy wearing feathers, this like British guy with like feathers and a big giant like fur coat. He's like, I'm a sovereign nation state. What are you doing here? You can't invade me. You know, and he has like one like World War I like aircraft or something that's like his like secret weapon. And he's like, I'm gonna deploy my aircraft on you. and like this one little stupid aircraft gets obviously annihilated by the giant fleet of these super beast like airships, right? That bring about a one world government. Shape of things to come. My wife overheard me. That's it. Shape of things to come. Yes, baby. Okay. Yeah, sorry.
That's all right.
The volume up a little bit. Okay, so yeah, people have to watch The Shape of Things to Come online. They can go on YouTube. I think you can even find the film for free to watch. Very useful psychology. But that's it. I mean, so the oligarchy wants to create a world that cannot be. They want to create a utopia. It's the only way to get to it is to ultimately force humans to think that we're fish, to think that we have to breathe underwater. But the consequence is a lot of dead humans, and ultimately a lot of dead oligarchs, because the oligarchy, when they kill as a parasite, which is what they are, their host, they ultimately also end up doing themselves a lot of damage too. And that's the case throughout history. You can't understand anything about history if you don't recognize this quality of the oligarchy that parasitically destroys, even if they don't really want to. It's like, do you think that they wanted Rome to collapse? No, they didn't. They wanted Rome to be the forever empire. They couldn't do anything but, though, cause Rome to collapse by virtue of that host taking on the attributes that they demanded it take on for their pleasure. And as a consequence, they had to, like, it took them several centuries to sort of reacquire, to reorganize themselves, try to rebuild to whatever degree they could in a new location geographically. And they just like migrated. But ultimately, it's a defiance of God. It's a defiance of natural law. It's an ideological cult that is committed to a concept that they know is not true, but they're committed to it anyway, of death and darkness being the ultimate center of causation of the universe. They believe that death, that decay, that the universe, the multiplicity of that we see within the universe, right? There's obviously different qualities, different quantities within the universe, but it's still one verse, right? Hence the name universe that came out of Pythagoras. There's a oneness that organizes all of the parts, all of the seeming anomalies, the oppositions, right? It's all unified under one theme. But what is the theme? Is that oneness going to be life, or is it going to be death? Is it going to be creativity, or is it going to be hate and despair? So they're committed to their resolving of the many into the one by a death principle, a decay. It takes on different, like, there's certain pseudoscientific language. But if you like read an issue of Scientific American, you hear standard model cosmologists talking about the eventual necessary heat death of the universe that is our destiny. Well, that's what it is. It's not really science. They're basically just telling you they've extrapolated certain trends that they perceive in the present into the future, and they've come to a consensus that the universe is going to be in a total heat death in some trillion years or whatever. So ultimately, existentially, what's the point? They've proven that there's no soul. We're just the sum total of our molecules and our atoms. There's nothing transcendental. That's what I was saying about the mechanic idea of like dropping the book, right? They've got so many people to think that that's science, that we forgot that no, there is this transcendental quality of these eternal concepts, universals, concepts of justice, of freedom, of the soul that knows these universals that must be more than the finiteness of my body, which is temporal and always changing. There's something non-changing as well that allows these types of conversations you and I are having to even happen. So the oligarchies, they hate that. And so, yeah, they're in it for delusion. That's really it. And they're worshiping at a God that doesn't exist, but they are acting like he does. So they're satanic. They're the thing that they worship, because they are satanic. My point when people say like, oh, you don't believe necessarily in the force of Satan as a force, an actual force of evil. I'm like, no, I don't believe in Satan as an actual force of evil in the universe. I don't. But I believe in free will, and I believe in bad ideas. We have the freedom to have bad ideas and freedom to create bad institutions. And the effect of the belief in Satan does exist, and it does cause damage historically, and will continue to. The oligarchy certainly believes it. They act as if he does exist, and that's dangerous, because they're willing to do a lot of bad. They're willing to blow up. They're willing to burn the earth rather than serve in heaven.
Let me ask you this, Matt. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a minute. And I don't necessarily believe this, but I think it might be another avenue, and I don't know. So I'm a UPS driver, and a lot of times I act as the shop steward to represent other drivers when there's problems and stuff in there. And dude, I like what I do, and working for a multinational corporation, in my opinion, sometimes gives you a window into the way the world actually works. And it seems to me the people that are at the board, the CEO, and upper division management, they've reduced people to numbers. And when you look at somebody like a number, it's really easy to strip away their humanity, and you just say, oh, well, 072 isn't performing. Let's just get rid of him and put in 097. And so a lot of times what happens is I'll talk to a driver who's having a problem with like productivity or something like that. Like apparently he's not putting up good enough numbers to get the bonus for the people that, that they see upstairs. And so I'll sit down with the guy and I'll be like, look, what's going on? Oh, well, I have these 7 problems. First off, my child's sick. Number 2, the amount of work they're asking me to do is unreasonable in the amount of time they want it to do. And so I will sit down and I'll prepare an argument for this guy to go in and talk to the management that want to fire him because he's not working fast. And so sometimes I'll take a day or two to figure out like the best argument. Like, you guys are seeing this person like a number. How dare you? Do you have a family? Why don't you see him as an individual? A squared plus B squared is C squared. That's what you're saying, you want C squared, but you're not counting F and G. You're not counting all the variables in the equation. So you're not going to get C squared. And so, sometimes I'll prepare that argument for like 2 or 3 days, and then I'll get ready to go and fight for the guy. And he'll come to me like, you know what? I don't want to do it anymore. I don't want to fight. I don't want to sit down in front of these guys. I talk to them. It's okay. And they make this deal. And after a while, as like a shop steward, it becomes pretty disheartening because I'll be like, no, you have to fight for this. Like, this is something that matters to you, not only you, but your family. You must fight this because you're standing up for your family when you do this. You have to do it. Oh, I don't want to do it. I'm afraid. Okay. And, once or twice, not too bad. But 7, 8 times, and then all of a sudden the manager comes to me like, look, George, what are you doing, man? Like, these guys it doesn't matter. Like, we figured it out. And I'm like, no, you didn't figure it out. You just bullied him. You treated him like a piece of garbage. How dare you do that? I hate that. But on some level, then I begin seeing the union guys ahead of me striking deals with the upper division management. And it's so disheartening to me to see that happen. And then I put myself in the position of someone who's at upper management. And I go, fuck, man. On some level, I begin seeing like, yeah, we don't like it either, George, but what are we supposed to do? Like, there's a 15,000 drivers here. I'm sorry that these handful of guys aren't working. They are good people, but we're just going to cut them because it's better that way. And, what must it be like for someone who's born into one of these old world families? Like, what must it be like for them to be handed the managerial reins and say, look, this is how it is. Maybe it's not that they worship Satan and want to destroy everybody, but maybe it's like, fuck. And I'm not a greater good argument guy, Matt, but like, maybe there's something to be said about like statistics that you and I don't get to see. What do you think? Is that like, and that's just a devil's advocate, I don't know that, but what must it be like for that?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a useful exercise. And I like anomalies. I like looking for anomalies that sort of deviate from a norm. That's usually where you're going to find the mind, the most mind food in those places of singularity. So it's a good exercise to think, okay, well, we know that there's a certain set of normative behavioral traits that are encouraged and cultivated by design within the oligarchy. And there's certain behavioral norms and traits that are cultivated by design within the broader slave families. The majority are expected to be, maintain themselves as a slave family, lower caste. And then you got like Aldous Huxley gets at in his Brave New World. You got alphas, alpha pluses, you got some betas, some managers, lower level managers, all the way down the chain of command. But then, like, where does it break down? And I find it interesting. Like, I know that one thing that's an anomaly in more recent times is the I'm forgetting his name now. Which DuPont was it? But one of the more recent DuPonts, who was the heir of the DuPont dynasty, ended up. He got married in the 80s, and the best man and woman at his marriage were Lyndon and Helga LaRouche. He was recruited because he had read some of the EIR, the Executive Intelligence Review material in the when he was a student, and in the 70s, early 70s, and he was recruited to become a member of that organization. He started like bankrolling, like providing some of his money that he was allowed to access before he got the full inheritance. He started giving it to the LaRouche magazine and helping to for the researchers to carry out research. And all of that's bad. Like that from the standpoint of like an oligarchy, because his family has certain expectations of him, and his family is like a little mercenary dynasty family. It's been like that for a few generations. So for somebody to go off the reservation of his caliber, and from his caste, upper level manager caste, that was not acceptable. There was a lot of psychological warfare operations there. And I heard stories. I'm not going to go through that. It was a crazy period to try to pull him back into the thing to suck him in. And I think it actually ended up succeeding, unfortunately. But that's an anomaly. So it happens, right? They're still humans. Humans are humans. They're still going to resonate to human ideas. I got the case of King George III of Hanover, the king who was the presiding king over the American Revolution. He's an interesting case study. Is he evil? No, he's not evil. He's not evil. He actually was friends with Benjamin West. Who was Benjamin West? Benjamin West was Ben Franklin's Philadelphia. He was a painter, probably the greatest painter of his age. Born in Philadelphia in like the 1730s. Benjamin Franklin recruited him, was his early patron, discovered he had talent, made sure he had as many opportunities to really like grow into his talent, and positioned him in a place in the early 1770s in Britain, where he became a founding member of the Royal Academy of Fine Arts. And by the time the American Revolution rolled around, he was the president of the British Royal Academy of Fine Arts. His son, the godfather of his son, was Benjamin Franklin. He was a devout Republican. He loved the ideals of America, but he was also the exact same age as King George III. And King George III really liked him. He organized him. And he would like do court paintings and would just chat with George. And it was like just organizing George. And George was like a young guy. He was kind of like, he's born into this evil thing, expected to oversee evil. But he also really started like falling in love with the ideas of freedom, and maybe human beings are actually, maybe we're all born equal after all, and he started like, and he kept the painter West in his palace till late in the night, having philosophical dialogues. So he ended up becoming the crazy king, right? That's what they call him, like Crazy King George III. He was put in a sanitarium for the last 10 years of his life. He was removed from the position of king, because he couldn't coexist with the ideals of a human in his heart and the mental structures he was expected to abide by and maintain. He couldn't live with that level of dichotomization, and he snapped. And it's totally lawful that he snapped the way he did. But there's many examples of that. Not as many as I would like, but they're there. And so I mean, I believe in redemption. I believe in self-examination and the ability for somebody to feel the weight of justice, because if you've done things shamefully, there's a reason why you feel shame when you go to bed at night, or you wake up with a cold sweat, or your subconscious is not letting you be at ease. There's a reason for that, and you can overcome it. Anybody can heal from that, but you have to change qualitatively something about yourself that is causing you to feel that, right? It's our soul talking to us, saying it's not happy with the damage we've done to it. So that I've seen evidence. I mean, I've seen no evidence that proves to me that we, till the moment we're dead, every single moment leading up to that moment of death, we can always willfully make the choice to change and to redeem ourselves, ask for forgiveness, and become a human. But again, that humility is very hard to do, especially if you're taught to be arrogant and godlike. It becomes more and more difficult. But it's possible, and I think ultimately I have hope for the grandchildren. I don't have hope for the current generation active today. I don't have a lot of hope for, but I think that when I look at maybe the son of King, Prince William, or maybe the son, the grandkids, the next generations, I got hope for them. They might be.
I think his name is George.
Ironically, so that would be a fun irony of history. Yeah. Okay. Maybe George could finally live the life that his namesake wanted to live. Who knows? And couldn't. And
Matt,
real skills.
I have a question that's been burning. Like, you have an extensive background in a lot of different histories, and I know one of them is like Russian history. And I'm curious if you're familiar with A.T. Fomenko's books, history, science, or fiction. Have you read Anatoly Fomenko?
No, tell me about him.
Oh man, you're gonna love this. So Anatoly Fomenko was a Russian mathematician, and he did some work around something called parameter D. Parameter D is the phases of moon eclipses. And there's the parameter D is like this, and you love anomalies. So parameter D is this anomaly where there wasn't a particular cyclical moon eclipse in like 700 years. And Anatoly Fomenko's like, what are you talking about? Like, the eclipses are like the best form of time management. And so he goes back and he uses this mathematical model to show, actually, the history we've been written is all bullshit. There's a guy named Joseph Scaliger who wrote down like a really enormous chunk of history. And it brings into one of his analysis is, isn't it weird that there was a dark ages in the Enlightenment, and then there was a dark ages in Rome? And like, he his thesis is that there's a missing 700 years, and that the Dark Ages were in fact the Roman ages. And like I know that sounds crazy, but if you read like his books, like he puts out some pretty good evidence that this could be true. And because you have such an incredible background in history, I was just curious if you had thought about it or researched it, or I've made some actually pretty awesome videos on it. I can send them to you.
Okay, well, maybe I'll I just found it on Amazon. It's a bit expensive, but I got it on archive.org, which is for free, so I can look at it digitally and have a review it. So maybe you could just tell me, so when you're saying that according to the astronomical data that he was looking at, there's 700 years missing at the end of the Roman Empire. So what can you maybe shed a bit more, put more meat on the bones of what exactly does that mean? Does it mean like we experience 700 years that are unaccounted for, of period where we just have been induced to have a collective amnesia because it was so bad? Or like, what do you?
Yeah, I think that the premise is that 700 years was made up in order to instill the ruling class that we have now. Like he says that there was a large period of where people were illiterate. No one knew how to read. And so the only people that could read was the church, right? And so they created like this 700 years of history that never happened. They created they wrote the Bible. They wrote all this literature that never happened. But how would you
like what would be the 7-year time frame? Like 400 or so, when the first invasions happened in Rome, till about 1300 after or so, Middle Ages period.
Yes, he says that the wars that happen, like if you look at like the wars that happen in the Homeric verses, those are like the same as the Crusades.
So he's saying that the Homeric works are actually describing something that happened during the Crusades?
Is that what he's saying? Yep. And if you look at the characters that are so I'll just read you the quick synopsis of the back right here.
Okay.
Jesus Christ was born in 1152 AD and crucified in 1185 AD. The Old Testament refers to medieval events. Apocalypse was written after 1486 AD. Not quite what you have learned in school. This version of events is more substantiated by hard facts and logic, validated by new astronomical research and statistical analysis of ancient sources, than everything you have read and heard about history before. The so-called consensual history is a finely woven magic fabric of intricate lies about events predating the 16th century. I think that's 16th century. There is not a single piece of firm written evidence or artifact that could be reliably and independently traced back earlier than the 11th century. The archaeological, dendrochronological, paleographical, and carbon methods of dating of ancient sources and artifacts are both non-exact and contradictory. The dominating historical discourse in its current state was essentially crafted in the 16th century from a rather contradictory jumble of sources, such as innumerable copies of ancient Latin and Greek manuscripts whose originals have vanished in the Dark Ages, and the allegedly irrefutable proof delivered by the late medieval astronomers, all cemented by the power of the ecclesial authorities. But I know that you as a fellow of the American University of Moscow, maybe you have some deeper resources you could reach into to validate some of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm curious. Does he talk about Chinese or Arabic or Persian historic records as well, or is he specifically looking at the Roman Western matrix of history or is it intersectional? Does he also incorporate? Yeah. Does he deal with China's history?
I do. I've just finished one, and there's like 5 books, and they're all pretty thick. But the level of documentation there is fascinating. I don't know if I have a well enough grasp of history to refute it. And from reading it, like, I think that what he is writing makes a lot more sense than what I was taught in school. Now, that's not saying very much, who knows what I was taught in school, but.
Well, yeah, look, I don't know. I'm reticent. I'll look through the book. I found it digitally. My approach is always to try to look at things as a top-down chemistry first. So I never look at like Canada by itself, or the US by itself, or Europe by itself. I try to look at like these as parts of a broader chemistry. So in that sense, what do the records say of the Tang Dynasty, which has certain writers, poets, historical records well preserved? What about the Han Dynasty? What about that period? What about the Abbasid Dynasty or the earlier Caliph?
What does that dynasty say about the Roman times?
Well, in the case of China, China has two periods that overlap. Oh, it has a lot of periods. There's several thousand years of Chinese historic records going back to the Warring States period, 500-600 BC, and you got before that like 6 different dynasties that were all vying the Qi, and I mean there's a lot that have been built up, and then you had sort of the first unification of a nation around, or an identity around, the Han Dynasty, which seems to have occurred a little bit in the wake of Alexander and Alexander's go east policy, right? Which went all the way to Bactria, like Afghan. They're still pulling out relics from Bactria and Afghanistan and India, East India, featuring like Hellenistic architecture and statuary, and a lot of it's been. I mean, part of the problem is that the oligarchy is good at destruction. They like burning down libraries of Alexandria. They like destroying our collective memory of the past to give us a lot less to work with. That's a problem.
That's what he's talking about in this book. I think it's the Orwell quote that says, "He who controls the future controls the past. He who controls the past controls the present." Like, if you can control right now, then you can rewrite history and control the future, right? And like, it just seems, and again, like I am more of a truck driver than a historian, but you have an extensive background, and I admire the work you've done. And if you could take a look at that, and maybe you could come back and we could talk about it.
Let's do it. Because me just talking without actually looking at it. But keep in mind too, I'm not a historian either. I was never trained in history. I'm just kind of figuring things out like you are. I mean, it's but yeah, I'll have a look at it for sure.
That's awesome. And I don't know. I know we're kind of getting closer to the end of our time here, but let me ask you this one as well. So when we look at H.G. Wells and the Morlocks and the Eloys, like, I'm not sure which one's winning there. Like, one of them lives underground, but then they come back and they grab the Eloys and eat them. But the Eloys have like this easy life. Like, if H.G. Wells is trying to say he wants to be one of those, like, which one would he want to be? I wouldn't want to be either.
No, he was embracing the absurd. Like, part of what he was doing, he's a little bit more honest in the sense that he could embrace the absurdity. He could lean into the absurdity a little bit. And he's also from a poor family, right? Like, his mom was his dad was a gardener. His mom was a house servant. He just had, he was picked up by Thomas Huxley, another person not born into any noble family. Darwin's bulldog, and he was his teacher at normal school in the 1870s in Britain, and saw that there was a spark of evil, a spark of talent, creative flexibility in this young H.G. Wells, George Herbert Wells, and recruited him, gave him some tests like they always do. He did the right thing, whatever messed up thing he was expected to do, he did well. And so he was brought into higher situations of privilege and experience, finding himself very quickly with the Fabian Society. And, he writes his critiques, as does Thomas Huxley, of the oligarchy that he is beholden to, that he wants to serve. He's kind of like a proto Yuval Harari. Is Yuval Harari a thing unto himself? No, he wants to be a house slave. He really wants it. That's all he wants, is to be petted, to be cherished as a courtier. With that's all. It's pathetic. And so he's a smarter version of Yuval Harari. That's what he is. And so he writes in a variety of his nonfiction works and in his letters, his critiques openly of the oligarchy's weaknesses, in that the oligarchy got too complacent in their bloodlines and in their stature and privilege during especially the 19th century. And he's like, they became too inflexible. They lost the talent. They lost the creative powers that they once had in their comfort, and so they became too predictable because they didn't allow for new blood, new talent to come in to replenish them and to rejuvenate them, which is why in the 19th century, the British Empire was on the descent, on the decline and collapsing, while you had, as we began our interview today, with a robust, new, optimistic, anti-Malthusian spirit animating the best of various cultures of the world around building rail together, building national banking structures, working together for the common good, making the pie bigger and better instead of just like fighting over diminishing returns. And so that new spirit was going to destroy the structures of ethics and values that the empire needed to maintain in order for its system to parasitically exist. And so H.G. Wells is just writing, you know, like they screwed up, and they needed young people like me. They needed young people like Thomas Huxley, my teacher.
Yep.
So he is able to diagnose through the veneer of his fiction writings, he's sort of extrapolating the logical consequences of certain sets of ideas into, in his case, he goes a million years into the future. That's pretty robust. Where he's like the oligarchy will evolve into these beautiful people who are ultimately just useless. They're like the humans in Planet of the Apes, who you know get their food provided to them, but then they also have to like become the food for the workers who will evolve underground into these dirty mutant warlocks and do all of the industrial labor, who have to then go out and eat sometimes through their LOI harvest. Now he's creating a nihilistic, you know, experience ultimately for his viewers. That's what he's trying to do. He's trying to convey a sense of the absurdity and thus the nihilism that you should expect to take into your heart as a victim of his brainwashing. He does it in all of his works. The Invisible Man has a lot of these nihilistic undertones too. There's not a single fiction book that doesn't have some of this poison, these Trojan horses he's slipping into the zeitgeist to make people more weak, more inclined to adapt to dystopic political situations that should arise. So rather than being a natural human who would resist, foresee the future, act preventatively on tyranny before it crops up, or if it does crop up, fight it. Rather than that, people will more be inclined to either participate in helping that tyranny come about, or if it does come about and they didn't participate, to then at the very least adapt to it without fighting, like the case of the people that you've been trying to mobilize in your workforce. And that's the consequence of this sort of cultural field that he and like-minded predictive programmers who took on the terrain of science fiction, they desired that effect to be there, which we see now very virulently in most of the dystopic films on Netflix that we're being encouraged to watch, or Amazon Prime or Crave or whatever. You know, it's mostly dystopic like programming in most of the stuff, at least the stuff that's produced from the West. You could find I would just say it's interesting. I find myself watching with my wife more and more South Korean and Chinese shows and movies now, when we want something just to like sit back and relax with. It's a world. It's a totally different universe of entertainment. There's almost always going to be, not always, but almost always, moral values embedded within the storylines. There is going to be a training of the mind of the viewer to appreciate the sophistication of political systems. It'll help to make. They're trying to make classical culture of China, of reading the classics, the Buddhist and the Confucian classics. They're making it cool. So it's in Asia, unlike us, it's actually becoming cool to read the classics. So they're really, that's part of their fight right now in opposition to the Great Reset crowd of the West that want to turn everybody into a computer Borg thing that you could just like turn on and off, and erase all of our memories of our past. They're going on a very good offensive, which we're not. I think Africa is starting to really move that way too. We see like a real rejuvenation of Sheikh Anta Diop, the great African intellectual who did deep dive histories into pre-colonial Africa. His works are amazing.
What's his name again? I'm sorry.
Sheikh Anta Diop. This is one of his books here. There's so many of his books. It's pre-colonial Black Africa. Dozens and dozens of these wonderful books. Okay. And he goes deep into the grandeur and advanced culture that had grown in Africa before colonial powers got in there and started like consciously just destroying their artifacts there. And this goes all the way back to deep history, you know? So this is becoming more publicized. There's a lot more effort in the African school system under the African Union right now to try to promote his research methods. He was himself a nuclear scientist. And he was like, if Africa can regain its legit pride of the grandeur that it once was before it got hijacked, then we would be able to immediately spring into the modern age with advanced nuclear science, space tech, advanced infrastructure that we could see is our right. He saw that as the universal right of all people,
Yep.
not something that's just like Westerners do nuclear power and space and infrastructure. Dark-skinned people, they're more natural in their savage tribal state, having windmills and walking 12 miles a day to get dirty water for their kids, who they have to see die, 1 out of 5 in the Central African Republic. That's just their natural ecosystem that we have to respect and even encourage. That's a racist thing that you see coming out of people like Biden and Joseph Borrell and van der Leyen. But real Africans who live in Africa don't think that way, and they that's obviously why they are going east right now as far as working with China in a much more favorable way than the abuse that they've suffered from the West. And that there's a big battle over Africa. But all that to say, it's cultural warfare. So in China and Africa, even in South America, where they haven't had the advantages of luxury and abundance that we've been given, that made us very complacent and stupid for the past 50, 60 years, they've actually felt the real brutal force of what globalization was, no illusion. So when it comes now crunch time, where the system in the West is collapsing, these people who have suffered so much are seeing that there's finally an opportunity to have access to a better life, all of these things that they want. So Russia, China, increasingly India, Iran have created this new type of collaborative system, which is providing the means of growing this garden. Whereas Borrell is saying, the world outside of Europe is a jungle and we are a garden, and the gardeners have to go out into the jungle, which grows so fast, and bring order to the jungle. Racist son of a bitch.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you think that no, it's awesome. I love talking about it and thinking about it. It seems to me it wasn't too long ago that Russia got rid of a large number of their oligarchs. And in some ways, when I look at China and I see them taking Jack Ma out of circulation a little bit, that seems to me to be what the West is so afraid of. Like, when we see a rise in oligarchs in our country. We see these billionaires that are supplanting states and governments and even the country. It's like, okay, Elon Musk is now in charge of defense, or he's, you're seeing Jeff Bezos in charge of commerce, and you're beginning to see the curtain pulled back in the oligarchical structure of our country. And it wasn't too long ago that Russia was like, dude, I want all these guys out of here. China's putting Jack Ma in their way. Is that kind of what's going on on some level? Is that this fight between nation states and oligarchs, or is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. That's totally it. Yeah.
It's crazy to think about. And maybe it's been happening for quite some time, but I'm only really begun to notice it. Maybe it's because I've begun to pay attention or listen to some people that are talking about it, and it's a fascinating time to be alive. And if we were going to leave somebody on a more positive note of like, what is it that we can do to make it better? I've always kind of gravitated towards, if you want to make the world better, try to make everybody in your circle better. Try to help them out doing something, and look in yourself. And if you make people around you better, you'll make yourself better and your community better. What are some things we could leave people with that might help them?
George, that's probably the most solid thing that you could say.
Thank you.
Like, we live in a culture of mediocrity. It is completely unnatural, but we're told that mediocrity is normal, and that we should calibrate ourselves to that world. The fact is, it is super abnormal and unnatural and anti-human. And the reason why there's such problems with like depression, why people have like a lot of anxiety, why there's a lot of antidepressants consumed, why there's a lot of like escapism that's so embraced from reality, it's because it is unnatural. You're being expected to adapt to something that you're not. So first of all, embrace that fact that it's not you. if you're feeling that off, it's not you. It's the system. And like Martin Luther King gave this great speech on being this fetish of being well adjusted. And he's like, look, everybody's talking about pop psychology, Freud being well adjusted. And he's like it's not something to brag about if you're well adjusted to a sick system that is doing evil.
That's so true.
You should take pride in being maladjusted. And he's like, I'm proud of my maladjustment to this society.
Yeah.
Now you can actually think you could be more at peace with yourself and more capable of acting to change the society as you should in some way. And you don't have to think big, because a lot of people, like I was, I had this conversation just yesterday with Tommy Corrigan, that like a lot of people, they become frozen because they can only think about, if I can't solve it all, I can't do anything. And it's like, don't try to solve it all. Like, first of all, accept what you're capable of changing. Yearn to become better so that you can lift heavier weight later. So don't, spend your time in as wise a way as possible, but change what you can for now, right? So, and the more you go outside of yourself, the more you try to become a better communicator, the more you're going into discomfort zones, which are always going to be, whenever you grow, you're going to be uncomfortable because you're leaving the known, which is your safety blanket. The safety blanket is everything I already know and have experienced. But that's not sufficient. To be a human, you always have to go into new terrain that you've never experienced. So you have to leave the safety blanket. And at a certain point, it's going to be a bit arduous at first and a bit scary, but the more you do it, the more gratifying it feels. And then you start liking it more, and you start wanting to leave the comfort. You start getting more comfortable in discomfort. So you want to find a way to slowly find comfort in discomfort in that healthy way. And that in that way, you're sort of like discovering that the universe is more ironical than you realized. It's more poetic, because it's like you're finding ways of breaking the rules in a lawful way. Because the rules themselves are not necessarily lawful. Some of the rules that we're being set to standardize ourselves around are the cause of our destruction, right? So good laws versus bad laws. So to break, you can break rules in an unlawful way, the way we see these eco-anarchists going at, they are correct in identifying the unnaturalness of the world that they're in. They're correct. But they because they didn't discipline themselves internally, they don't really understand who they are as a beautiful species made in the image of God as being a good thing. They only have a lot of like self-loathing. Well, they're thus only forced to conclude, well, either adapt to become part of the above grounders and oversee the destruction of civilization from Davos, or go all eco, blow up a train or something. No, that's an unlawful way to break a rule. But the lawful way of breaking a rule would be to do what Ben Franklin does, discover a higher law of electricity, which is a universal phenomenon that we see, shaping the galaxy as a whole, and the intercommunication between planets and the sun, and suns between stellar space. There's all sorts of evidence of these electric currents, these Birkeland currents, the interconnectedness of our environment. And creating these magnetic fields as well that then modulate the flow of intergalactic cosmic radiation, which fluxes in and out, shaping the environment that drives things like creative evolution in a designed, organized manner. The very earthquakes and storm systems, volcanism, and other things that we've been led falsely to believe are these terrestrial phenomenon are actually being entirely shaped by forces we don't understand from our galaxy center, from the sun, from other galaxies as part of the galaxy cluster that we are just a part of with the Milky Way, and forces inside of the Earth that we have no clear idea about, in terms of like, well, what the hell is it? Is it some sort of a fusion process in the sun? In the sun, but what about inside of the Earth? What's creating abiotic petroleum? What about water? What's going on inside the Earth such that new water is being created as well as oil? What's going on? Is the Earth maybe expanding? Maybe that's what's going on. Maybe that's what's causing the continent. Maybe it's actually not Pangea that was once the home of all of the Earth's landmass. Maybe all of the Earth's landmass was connected together in a smaller volume of space when the Earth was maybe a smaller volume at some earlier stage, and has been growing that way. Do we see any evidence in the empirical data, perhaps of the age of the radiocarbon aging of the ocean soils as you go into the center of either Pacific or Atlantic Oceans? Do we find like a gradient of youthfulness in the rocks that get younger and younger until the very midpoints, and then get older again till they like go over to the other side of the ocean? Maybe we find things like that. Maybe we find that pterodactyls couldn't actually fly according to their bone structure unless the Earth's gravitational field were like 1/3 what it is today, back when pterodactyls were around. Maybe that's a thing. So maybe we might find that there's this whole way of looking at geology, a creative expression in the universe, biology that's in non-Darwinian form, that's tied to what the entire universe is doing, which is being suppressed to keep us in a state thinking small, thinking like little, feudal mind slaves. Maybe that should be what we give our passion to and give our time to when we're thinking about, well, do I spend the next 2 hours, losing myself on Twitter or watching brain dead crap on Netflix? Or maybe I should like find a cool book or watch some cool documentaries that are going to get me excited about reality. And maybe I'll find that if I'm taking notes and doing it in a non-consumer like way, I might make some of these ideas my own and internalize them in such a way that maybe I could talk about them in a better and better way in time with other people that makes me a better instrument of truthfulness. And maybe in the course of doing that, I find myself helping others. I find myself finding more of myself in helping others and being a better person, so that when real opportunities should maybe fall into my lap to do something that I should be doing, I'll be qualified to take on that responsibility. Whereas right now, most people, I are good people who want just to feed their kids. They want a better future. They want to avoid World War III. But if you gave, I would say, unfortunately, the majority of people in our world who are good people an actual position in government or in some situation where they're making real decisions, they wouldn't know what the hell to do. They would probably make a mess. So you want to make sure that you're qualifying yourself with good thoughts and doing good actions and associating yourself with more good people with good thoughts and good actions, and see what happens. Like, don't get all stressed if you can't save the world, but I mean, do that. You'll be happier with yourself,
That's inspiring. It's well said. It shines light on the imagination that every human is capable of. And maybe that's why there's this false sense of scarcity. Maybe that's why there's this ominous World War III, we're all going to die, is because we are on the cusp of a world we've only imagined. When I see the work that you have pointed out about some gentleman that's predicting earthquakes, and when I see the idea of the electric universe or purple dawn theory, or the way in which the core of our world works, or the expanding world, or the Milosevic cycle is the way in which we spin around the earth is not a circle, but an oblong. And like, you know what? Like, so much of history is fiction. It's just the stuff people wrote. And what happens when we start discovering that we are just as capable as every expert out there? As long as we're willing to put in the work, we can be the expert. We can be the person that drives our own future. We can be the person that paves the way for our child to walk down a golden pathway. We can do it, Matt. And I'm so stoked to talk to you. This conversation has exceeded all of my expectations. I'm so thankful for that. Hey, have you ever heard, there's this incredible, lovely, intelligent writer that wrote this book called The Black Sun on Which the Empire Never Sets. Have you ever heard about that person?
I think it's ringing a bell. Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic. Can you tell us more about some of the books you've written, where people can find you, what you got coming up, and what you're excited about?
Yeah. Hold on. Okay, so the beautiful, intelligent person, I really appreciate the little plug for my wife there. So Cynthia Chung, who's a co-author with me on the Clash of the Two Americas series, the book you just referenced. I'll send you do you have a copy of this? Did I send you a PDF?
No, but I'll buy one from you, man. I want to help support it.
Sweet. Okay. Well, I'll send you the PDF to download.
And then I'll buy it as well. Yes, sure. Please do.
Okay. So this is the book. She just put this out about a month ago. Birth of International Fascism and Anglo-American Foreign Policy. Got a little picture of the Black Sun there, setting with the obvious little swastika thing.
Is that the Norwegian flag? The Norwegian Navy flag?
No. This is actually the Nazi. Well, it's becoming that increasingly, but it's
that's so funny.
Yeah. But yeah, Norway's Jens Stoltenberg has been sanctioning putting Black Sun of occult symbolism on the Ukrainian figures who have been fighting the Russians, and that they've been putting on the official NATO social media page, which she actually did some screenshots of. But yeah, we can't actually sell this in Germany because you can't have symbolism that involves any memory of what the Germans did in the past in present material at all. It's like illegal to talk about Nazism, even anyway, it's weird. So yeah, that's a crazy sick read. Really, really thorough research, a lot of new discoveries that I've never seen anybody do, which ties all the way into JFK's murder and beyond. So yeah, that's a book. If you want to ever talk to her, I'll give you her email. You could definitely, I'm sure
Love
she'd be
to.
super happy to chat with you. And yeah, if people want to pick up this book or any of our books, they can go to CanadianPatriot.org.
Mm-hmm.
There's links there to either buy the PDFs or we're unfortunately selling the hard copies on Amazon because they just make it so damn easy. But I got to find an alternative at some point. And if you want, yeah, we were doing the signed copies, but honestly, it's too much work. But yeah, do that. And otherwise, if they want to get a subscription, you can get free PDFs if you get the paid subscription to our Substacks. And it's like $50 a year, along with like free lectures, because we do weekly lectures, weekly workshops on Plato's dialogues that we're working through. And we've been doing all of this for about 3 years. So if people want to be involved with those things or just listen in, ask questions to our various, expert speakers, they could just get the paid upgrade. Or if you can't afford it because the economy is shit, I get it. Send an email to info@risingtidefoundation.net and we'll put you on the mailing list.
What is info? What is Rising Tide?
Right. So it's more of a cultural educational website that my wife and I set up in 2019. And yeah, it's risingtidefoundation.net. They can look at the About Us section. We're basically, it's focused a little bit more on less geopolitics, though there is a bit of that, and more the question of like the recapturing the classical standards of excellence that have been destroyed in our school system, and also looking at culturally what was the greatest moments of various other cultures within either Africa or China or India or Russia or anywhere. What are those moments of universal beauty that expressed itself in their own beautiful, unique ways in various cultures, so that we could know what we want to talk to and bring out in our neighbors, and also see as something that's very similar to ourselves, which is the best cure for crusaders. So when you have social engineers who want us to think in a more crusading fashion about going to war with our neighbors because they're different from us, that all of that only works like, hey, China's sending military balloons at us. Yes, let's give our support to the war with China. This only works because people are ignorant as shit about Chinese culture, civilization, the Chinese identity. They just don't know. And so with that ignorance, it's a fertile soil for Cold War paranoia and weaponization of idiot people who are just, products of the school system. Yeah. So the Rising Tide Foundation is designed to sort of like take the fuse out of those ignorant bombs and, do it with knowledge. So
it's beautiful. It is beautiful. One thing we didn't get to, but it maybe I have fun thinking about this, and I wanted to give you this little pearl to maybe you could think about it. Maybe next time we could talk about it. But what do you think? Plato would think about Carl Jung's work on the shadow? Just something to think about, and maybe we could talk about that next.
I mean, I'll say a word about that.
Yeah.
He would not approve of Carl Jung's work of the shadow.
Why not?
Because Carl Jung did not want to. Plato has a story of the charioteers that we have sort of like two horses. One horse represents a certain function of the human desires and drives, and the other force represents another often opposing desire. And then there's the charioteer. Then there's the eye that is supposed to direct and improve the behavior of both horses, so that they don't fight each other, but actually work together with their different attributes. And the point of the self-examination process that Plato demanded upon all students who would enter into his academy, which involved a deep immersion into constructive geometries, and he made the point: let no one enter here who has not mastered geometry. He doesn't mean mathematics; he means geometry, and he means also astronomy. And he lays it out in the quadrivium, the schooling structure that he lays out in the quadrivium system, right? Health of body, mind, and soul, right? Music, astronomy, constructive geometry, and physical work. So you need to create a situation. Because why does he value geometry? And he says to his students in the academy, no one is qualified to start philosophizing about metaphysics and justice before they master this domain of space-time, of mastering the nature and structure of space-time, both outside of themselves, but also simultaneously, you come to realize it's also you're discovering how your own mind works when it's making simple discoveries of reality. So you're discovering, and you know, whether you're doubling the square in the Meno dialogue, or whether you're working on discovering the physical reality shaping the shadows of number in the form of the Theaetetus dialogue that goes through like the different species of square numbers, you know, 1, 4, 9, 16, 25 onwards. So you got the square number species, but then you have the oblong numbers, the 6, the 8, the 10, you know, numbers that can only be divided into shapes that have like, you know, 2 different sides for a rectangle. So 2 and 5 make 10, right? 2 and 4 make 8. So you have those, but then you have another set of numbers called the primes, which are and that can only be divided by 1 in themselves. So they're like they have a different identity. But Plato and Pythagoras, because Plato is a Pythagorean, are not numerologists the way their enemies and rivals have painted them. The people say, oh, Pythagoras believed all truth was in number. Plato believed all truth was in number. No, they believed that number itself was the shadow of physical reality, qualities. So that all of the numbers, every number that exists is one of those 3 families, right? That I just pointed out: oblong, square, or prime. Yeah. And from there, when you're using math, when you're using fractions or anything, you're thinking, if you're a healthy person who's made those discoveries, you're thinking about the physical reality of, like, you're thinking like a cube square relationship, like the planetary systems of Kepler's harmonic law, right? He discovers that there's a relationship between the square of the period of all planets relative to the mean distance of the cube of the mean distance of their distance to the sun, has a certain relationship, the square cube relationship, that is constant amongst all of the planets in our system, which has found itself to be true even as new planets were discovered that he didn't know about. Probably also going to be true around other planetary systems in other star systems that we have not yet discovered. So when you're doing that, you're not just thinking about the number 2 and the number 3. You're thinking about the square and the cube. You're thinking about, right, a 1D, a 2D, and a 3D space-time. But you've discovered it, and then you've applied it. So you're discovering how your own mind works, such that when you now go into the domain of discussing politics, freedom, justice, you're going at it with a strong foundation of discovery and the unification of the inner universe and the outer universe. So as you do that more and more, as he points out in the Meno dialogue, you are helping others, right? Because what is virtue in the Meno dialogue? The whole thing is about, like, well, what is virtue? Is it this or is it this? And and it's quickly he never gives you a final answer, but he's taking you through several experiences in the Meno dialogue of an unvirtuous person who's not self-aware, in the form of the slave master Meno himself. He takes you through a young person who has a lot of beautiful potential and is more creative than the slave master, the slave boy, who actually doubles the square. But more importantly, he takes you through the process of virtue as a living reality, which is teaching and helping others, giving of yourself, because you want to awaken the good inside of the child. You also want to awaken the good inside of Meno. He's trying to tease Meno into making a discovery, because he knows that that you're going to discover more of the good of what you are when you're proud that you can do something that is universal and true. But Meno is incapable of doing it. He's even insulted that he's being, like, pulled into it. But the kid, who is totally, like, no arrogance, total humility, very fertile soil, and he does it, and is so happy that he does. And it's again this, what is virtue? It's not a thing that can be defined. It's about the process of giving, receiving, sharing. And as you do, your horses come into alignment. Your desires, what you want and what you think, are increasingly are working together. And the charioteer is not forcing behavior onto the different sides that are at war with each other, but the charioteer has, like you know, Plato says in the Gorgias dialogue, you're not master of yourself. Someone else is going to be master of you. So you have to take responsibility to master yourself, to be undominated by your inner beast, by not making your inner beast die, not making it become something unnatural, but domesticating it so that it serves you. It serves you what your soul desires as being a good and healthy soul. So in that sense, all of the forces of the basement in the Carl Jungian language of the shadow world are not something that you're necessarily like using the dark forces. You're not channeling the dark forces to serve you. You are transforming the dark forces themselves so that they're not dark forces. You're not there. There won't be the subconscious elements within you underlying, bubbling under the surface, are not going to be something which just bubble out of your control, out of your free will's influence, or out of your own conscious self's understanding. They're increasingly coming into harmony. Your dreams are going to be increasingly also shaped by the good, by the true, not by darkness, in that sense, or anything of the sort. So all of the parts are coming in alignment. And I think in the Carl Jungian world, I mean, why was Carl Jung, he saw himself as a messiah figure. He was participating in overseeing sex orgies in the Black Forest. Why was he doing these things? Why, what the fuck was going on in his mind and heart that he thought that was like a natural way of expressing his inner freedom? And like, what the hell was up with his relationship with Otto Gross, at Monte Verita, which is this Luciferian commune at the center of so much messed up evil throughout the 20th century. What the hell was Otto Gross, who was his mentor in many ways? He says so. This guy is a psychopath who, drove a couple of his leading patients into committing suicide because he's like, no, your life is better off just you ending it here. And he gave them poison to kill themselves. And why did he think that was like a good therapy? And there's a recent movie, which is not entirely untrue, about the Otto Gross Jung relationship that came out in Hollywood. I forgot the name of the movie now, but people can find it. So I think that there's like artificial dualities, kind of like what I got out of that article on Keynes versus Hayek, as a fake debate between artificial, are you bottom up or are you top down? Are you about the emotions or are you about the mind? Artificial dualities to resolve the one and the many that have been put onto us to keep us deflected. And I think in the case of like the psychoanalytical world, the Jung versus Freud debate is another one of these expressions of politically charged artificial dualism, which disrupted a healthier Platonic resolution. Because if you want to look at somebody who Plato would be happy with, as far as like modern psychoanalysts of the modern world, you want to look at people who loved and used the Platonic method, like the first generation Gestalt psychologists. And I'm talking about specifically Wolfgang Köhler, Max Wertheimer, Kurt Kofka, first generation, because the second, third generations of Gestalt psychologists became completely dominated by the Tavistockian New Age clique of loose. So, but go to the first generation, read Wolfgang Köhler's A Place of Value in a World of Facts, or he wrote a book called Gestalt Psychology. It's so good. And the whole point is that they're using the Platonic method. They're saying, okay, well, not how do we make better adjusted people? How do we deal with resolving neurotic disorders? They're not doing that. That is a consequence of their work, but that is not what they're doing. Whereas I think like Freud and Jung are putting too much emphasis upon that, and the behaviorist school as well, which is another like false artificial branch of B.F. Skinner, treats human beings like another artificial like polarization. But they're saying, okay, well, what is the mind and what is it designed to do? That's their question, right? And then we could see what is it in society that is, as far as social structures, that is prohibiting the minds of our patients from being able to express what the mind is designed and yearns to do, as its nature is designed to do, to be creative, to discover, to apply its discoveries. And they're looking at things like visual illusions. How does the mind sense relationship work? What does that give us as an insight into how discoveries are made? What about metaphor? What about allegory? These nonlinear parallels, that's the heart of poetry, part of science. Because you discover a concept and you got to figure out how do you wrap it into something of the concept is an immaterial idea, right? It's got no form to it. It's just an idea. But now it doesn't work if you can't communicate it to other minds in the world, past or future. So you have to wrap it metaphorically around images, symbols, other things that are infused with meaning and are then allowed to be communicated. But it only works best if people understand what your mind was doing and not simply worshiping the formula that you've just created as a symbol. Otherwise, you just make a bunch of monkeys.
Right.
So in the work of Kafka and Wertheimer and Köhler, they're all looking at case studies of what were creatively potent people doing at the moment of eurekas. How did they transform those eurekas into action? How did that change their free will? What does free will play in the process of new ideas. All of this stuff. So that's the right place. Plato would be happy with that approach, but that got derailed. It got absorbed, co-opted by the enemies of humanity, who were busy doing the shit that my wife writes about in this book. But you can read them. You can still, their writings are sometimes a bit expensive because there's a lot of work to like not to destroy, to make unavailable their books that haven't really received printing after the 1950s. So they're rare. Sometimes you got to pay a lot of money, but it's worth it. And if you can't, archive.org is still available with scans of most of their works that you can read on digitally. But yeah, those guys were solid.
Do you think that's a good place to start, as a place of value and a world of facts? Is that
yeah.
Okay.
And it's a short book too. So good, so essential. Yeah.
And what would be like, after I finish that one, what would be a next step from that one that would be a good follow-up?
Max Planck's long essay, which is also, it's not that bad. It's not that long at all. But it's called his Philosophy of Physics. Okay. And keep in mind, Wolfgang Köhler was the student of Max Planck, and Max Planck challenged his students to resolve the new problems that were emerging in the quantum domain around the 1890s, as Max Planck was pioneering this whole new domain of looking at, you know, the stuff of atoms and photons that we hadn't been able to properly think about. He opened up, and with the help of Einstein, both of them worked together to help put some shape on what was bubbling under the surface of the physical appearance of things, which allowed us to tap into a lot of energy regarding the geometries of atoms. But there was a lot of paradoxes arising regarding the wave-particle duality. And, you know, you look at something, you look at a photon or an electron, you change its location, or you change its momentum. That makes empirical observation difficult, right? So he was like, okay, it's going to be through the domain of investigating the mind, because in Max Planck, in the book the essay I just mentioned, The Philosophy of Physics, 1935, he's very clear that the only other phenomenon that we know of in this entire universe that changes when it is reviewed is the will itself. Because you could desire something that is sometimes like wrong, right? Or my feeling. Yeah. I sometimes feel something which is wrong. I feel maybe jealousy when somebody might look at my girlfriend, and I feel jealousy, but I'm like, that's wrong. And you feel that until you think about it. And if you think about your will, you think about your feeling, the very act of reviewing, of examining your feeling or will, changes your feeling or will. Mm-hmm. Just like the act of looking at a photon or an electron changes its positional location. So he's like, we can't progress further until we develop a better standard of what is mind, of measuring and talking about what is the mind that is the expression of something that is all over the universe, that the entire universe itself, and he makes this point too, doesn't seem to have any absolute objectivity in the universe. He believes that there's truth, but he's like, there's no truth in the universe that is detached from something that we would call subjectivity. And, you know, that's a bit of a tough thing for a modern scientist to say, but it's perfectly reasonable, because he knows that the universe doesn't exist without purpose. It does have purpose, and if it has purpose, it means that there's a cause of purposefulness for things to unfold the way they do and not some other way. And that implies a subjective creator, some creative spirit animating all cause, that we are made in that image of that spirit. And so something of ourselves has to be objective within us as well as subjective, and something outside of us has to be both objective but also subjective. So, and he knows, until you can get that, until a better field, a better appreciation for psychology can emerge, we won't make those breakthroughs properly in the atom or in cosmology, in the new domain of what was going on in other galaxies as well, which break the laws of standard model physics.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, Matt. Like I could talk to you for like another hour. Like I this whole world of psychology and mental wellness and clinical trials and big pharma testing for objective results and just denying any of the subjectivity. Like it's if I didn't have a heart out, man, you'd be in trouble, because I would pick your brain for the 2 hours. And I really enjoy this, man. This is really fun, and I feel like our conversation was just starting to get even better than it was when we started, man. So thank you.
It's fine. This is good. It's rare that I get to really just engage in this type of like idea content. It was really good. Really enjoyed this. And next time you want to do it, just let me know. I'm more than happy to join you. And my wife, I'm sure, would be very happy too. So I'll make sure you have her email address soon. Okay.
Yeah. Not only that, like I've been talking to like I'm a big in the world of psychedelics, and I'm so fascinated by behavior, and I've been having these ongoing discussions about decentralizing clinical trials, and why is it that you can't put any subjective information into the clinical trial? But I think that it would be fascinating to sit down with you and maybe your wife and some of these like different psychologists or some of these people that are sitting with people. Like, I think that would be a fascinating discussion, because I know that you have a different idea on some of the disassociatives and what's that doing, but maybe there's some good that can come out of them too. Again, I'm getting way ahead of myself, but I will reach out to you, and I really enjoyed this, and I want people to read your books. I want them to go to the CanadianPatriot.org, the Rising Tide Foundation. Check out your Substack / Matt Ehret, and it's a fascinating time. Thank you very much for everything, and I hope you have a fantastic day.
Thanks, man. You too. All right.
Okay.
Take care.
Okay. Bye. Oh, shoot.